Hey everybody, Mike O'Brien. We're here today with the current IAFC president, Ken Stuebing, who is the fire chief in Halifax. Now, a couple random things before we introduce the chief. Number one, Halifax is in a different time zone. So if you haven't spent time, most of us think like Eastern and the United States, North America is that first one. You got to look at a map, and Halifax is to the right even more and is in a different time zone, so a little earlier than our Eastern. But Chief Steubing and I have got to know each other over the years in a very unique story where we had a delayed flight. And we were sitting one row apart on our way to an FRI board meeting, and then we spent 3 hours in a car with a random stranger because our flight got pushed into an adjacent town. And it's been just great to get to know the chief, and I'm excited to talk to him today. True steward of the fire service and a great leader. So, Chief, welcome aboard. How are you today?
I am so well. Bright sunny day, as you can see behind me. I've got my shades pulled because I think I would blind out the camera. Certainly, honor and pleasure to be with you here today, Chief.
All right. So tell us about Halifax because, a lot of us didn't realize what a cool town this is with rich history. So tell us a little bit about Halifax.
Yeah, so I'm not formally from Halifax. I'm from southwestern Ontario. As you and I have chatted in the past, we were not that far apart. But I had the honor to join this team 4.5 years ago in the fire chief's role. And it's exciting to be here. Halifax is a city on the move. We just got identified by Census Canada as the fastest urban center that's growing in Canada, and I think we're the second fastest city as a whole across Canada for growth. So certainly a lot of building going on, a lot of people moving to the area, both immigrating here from other countries, but a lot of movement from across Canada to this great city. So certainly a rich history here with Halifax being one of the first places settled in Canada. Makes sense if you're coming from Europe that you would stop here, similar to Boston. We are, in fact, the oldest fire department in Canada. Certainly, that's a feather in the cap for our members here, and I'm just so excited to be in such a great, vibrant city that has a great culture and exciting place to end my career for sure.
Now, the fire department covers a large geographical area. Tell us about your stations, your staffing, because you have metro to rural, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge. So we are an amalgamated community. So Halifax Regional Municipality, or HRM, as we refer to it as, is an amalgamated community. So many communities were amalgamated over 2 decades ago into what is now our municipality. And when they merged those cities and amalgamated those cities and towns together, they actually merged all the fire departments together. We have some huge geography to cover. So we are over 5,500 square kilometers. So for those of you who think in miles, that's over 2,600 square miles. So that's the same size in Canada as a province. So one of our provinces is Prince Edward Island. So it is a huge geography. We have urban center. As I identified, we're the fastest growing urban center in Canada. So we are a metro department, but we are also a composite department. So those metro departments that have a composite structure are even more rare than metro departments in Canada. So while we have a large career force of over 500 career members, we also have over 500 some odd volunteer positions. We have a topography of urban center with suburban areas, then we have rural areas, and then we have rural remote areas. We have also challenges with wildland urban interface. We're a coastal community, a port community. So certainly some geographical challenges that we need to overcome. And being a port community also means we have rail here and an international airport.
All right. Which means you have a boat.
Yes, we're pretty excited about our a new boat. We had a vessel that was at the end of its life, and we replaced it a year ago, actually, just over a year ago, with Chipuktuk is its name, which means Halifax in our First Nations language here, our Mi'kmaq language. And we're pretty excited to add that firefighting capacity on our harbor.
Yeah, that's something we have a dinghy. I think it might not even be a dinghy, but yeah, that's
We
gonna.
got those two. We got those two for our inland lakes, and the boat that it replaced was actually a rib with a small pump on the rib, and a small monitor. So this is a big step up. This does fire flow equivalent to more than two large aerials with master stream devices. Has four master streams on it, so we can make a difference. We also have the Navy here, so we're the largest military port in Canada, and the Navy has firefighting capability on the water as well. So we also have contracts with tugs to be able to do even more water flow. And as so, we don't only just have the shipboard challenges and risks associated with the port, but the city itself is growing on the waterfront. So more waterfront development with buildings, being cantilevered out over the water. Three sides of the building are surrounded by water. So certainly the ability to get a vessel to be able to assist with that water flow is important. And obviously, even if you're not using the vessel for water flow for engaging in the firefight directly, they can be a portable hydrant when you might be tapping out your downtown hydrant. So yeah, certainly is an important piece of our kit. But a lot of people don't actually, even from Halifax, realize how busy the boat is with our rescue mission. So we are not first up in the water on our rescue mission. It would normally be the Coast Guard who is first up on the call out list. But because we can activate so quickly, we are usually there, almost all the time there first. So if there is a need for water rescue, that certainly is a big part of our mission. And we do a lot more boat calls than people realize. So we typically have about two calls per month, more than two calls per month on average a year. So, those would be two people that we're not able to, and most of those calls are rescues. So those would be two people who would probably otherwise drown if we didn't get there quick enough, right? So we're certainly excited about that new piece of kit for our department, and our crews take that responsibility seriously.
Yeah, that is something cool. All right, so obviously not your first stop in the fire service. What made you get into the fire service?
So certainly a long story. I didn't, I've heard people talk about growing up wanting to be a firefighter their whole life. Certainly, I had always respected the role of a firefighter. Played all kinds of games when I was a kid. None of them kind of envisioned myself as a firefighter. But when I was younger, my father had a company. He installed fire protection, actually, sprinklers. So I grew up in the family trade, worked in the family business as a tradesperson, got enough hours to write my journeyman ticket to be a sprinkler installer. But back in the 80s, which is what we're talking about, that kind of dates me a little bit, the economy was pretty bad. So there wasn't a lot of new growth. There wasn't a lot of industry popping up. There was maybe some inspections that needed to be done, but it was pretty tough to work steadily in the trades back in the 80s. So, and I was relatively young. So I had never really thought in high school that I would go to post secondary education, always kind of expected to be in the trades. But as I started to rethink my future, I was trying to figure out, if I'm not going to be in the skilled trades and work with my hands, which certainly is a noble way to make your living, I was trying to figure out what I should do because I hadn't really kind of thought academically about what to do beyond high school. So I had also been a lifeguard when I was younger, very involved in sports. One of those sports was swimming and had been a lifeguard. And I thought, well, that wasn't a bad job. maybe there's something like a lifeguard. So I ended up going back to school to become a paramedic. And at the time, the Canadian Fire Service was just looking into tiered response calls. So historically, the fire department had only gone to fires and rescue calls, did not engage in medical calls. So that's a big difference between the Canadian Fire Service and the American Fire Service. Not many Canadian fire services provide EMS or ambulance response. There are some, and we cover that in a few minutes, but back in the day, fire departments were just joining tiered response model, which means if you had a life-threatening medical call, they would send police, fire, and EMS to get somebody there quickly in hopes of stopping the clock and getting a defibrillator on somebody. So because I was brand new as a trained paramedic and had some background in trades and obviously sprinklers, somebody had suggested, actually my uncle had suggested, had you ever considered the fire department? And back in the day, paramedics didn't last long in their career because we didn't have automatic stretchers. People would usually hurt their backs. So, turnover in the paramedic field back then was about 7 to 12 years. So I was kind of disappointed, just graduated, just started working as a paramedic, and my placement facilitator started talking to me about, you should start thinking about what you want to do in a couple of years after you quit being a paramedic because your back can't take it. And I was like, I just went back to school to become a paramedic. So I threw my name in the ring to be a firefighter, where they were hiring in the local fire department in Kitchener, and was eventually was successful in that process. And they were very excited that I was a paramedic because they wanted me to be involved in the training of firefighters for tiered response calls.
Great.
So my first job in emergency services was as a paramedic. Worked full time as a paramedic in a few places across Canada, and eventually started in Kitchener as a Kitchener career firefighter. Worked my way up through the ranks to become a captain. Like a lot of firefighters, I worked on my days off, and I worked as a paramedic on my days off. So I had kind of moved up the ranks in the EMS world from a primary, in Canada, we call them primary care paramedics, advanced care paramedics, and critical care paramedics. So I became a critical care paramedic, worked on the air ambulance in Toronto with permission from both employers. So full time as a firefighter and as a captain at that point, full time as a critical care flight paramedic. And the decision that we made in my family was I was going to work two jobs, and my wife would stay home with our children. She had worked prior to that decision. But eventually, one day, I just came home and said, I just can't keep working two full-time jobs.
Mm.
An opportunity came up to join the Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service, which allowed me to keep both skills, but only drop to one job. So it was a promotion. So I moved to Winnipeg with our family. Became an assistant chief there in charge of operations, which included, it's a big metropolitan fire EMS service, one of the few in Canada, and was responsible for 900 and some odd firefighters, over 200 paramedics, and an arson strike force. And certainly enjoyed our time there. Our family loved working there. And living in Winnipeg. Actually, our youngest son is still out in Manitoba. Worked there for about 8 years, and then was offered an opportunity. I was promoted to a deputy, and then after working as a deputy there for 6 years, was offered an opportunity in Chatham, Kent, to be the fire paramedic chief, which afforded us. So for those of you who don't know where Chatham, Kent is, that's where you and I met. That's between London and Windsor in southwestern Ontario, about an hour's drive, a little bit less than an hour's drive from Detroit. So big geography there. Composite service delivery model, was responsible for fire services and EMS and emergency management. Worked there for 4.5 years, provided an opportunity to move up to the chief's role, but also an opportunity to get back closer to family, because I'm from Kitchener, which is about 2 hours away from there, and was actually getting close to retirement, and an opportunity had presented itself to come here. I was headhunted to join this team. I had done what I was asked to do in Chatham, Kent, and I felt it was time for kind of a new challenge and an opportunity to join this historic department. And my wife and I had talked about retiring on one of the coasts, and over the course of time had narrowed it down to Victoria in BC and Halifax in Nova Scotia, and then got asked to come here. So it was really a fairy tale ending to what has been certainly a rewarding career. I guess the downside for my wife and I is we have one son that's left in Chatham, Kent, and one son that's left in Winnipeg. Obviously, we still have family in Ontario as well. So we've spread kind of across the country, members of our family. So it makes getting together at holidays certainly interesting and rewarding to be able to see each other again. But certainly we love our time here.
Yeah, that's
a story.
Yeah, that's a cool way to get around. So in the Canadian Fire Service, here in the States, our firefighter and paramedic certifications are really state-based, right? The state set the rules of how you become a firefighter, how you become a paramedic. How does that work in Canada? Who sets the standards of, hey, this is what a paramedic is, this is what a firefighter is?
That's a great question, and it's changed over the course of time. So when I worked in EMS, again, for a large portion of my career, that was outside of fire services. So back then, there were paramedic services that were private paramedic services, and eventually private industry, for the most part, got out of EMS and either got run by the province or territory, or in a lot of other cases, upper tier municipalities. So that would be like a county. So there was a transition where, it went from, funeral homes that own fire departments, or private private businesses that own ambulances, where the government came in and said, okay, we want to provide more control, and legislation changed in a lot of cases, where the province took over more responsibility, set some standards. And some places it went up to the province and stayed. Other places it went up to the province and then kind of got pushed back down to the counties or municipalities. So that's typically where it is right now in Canada, although it's a little bit different in this province. EMS is the responsibility of the province. So this is the first time in my career that I've actually not been involved in service delivery of EMS. We still do tier response here, so it's still part of our mission. We're still trying to be good partners to make a difference for medical response, life-threatening medical response, but we do not do transport here whatsoever. The other example of a provincial run system is in Alberta and in BC. So those two provinces, as well as Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, our neighbor, actually are provincial run systems. In Ontario, they are run by municipalities. So, that's the way it is in the EMS or ambulance sector. In the fire sector, it's different in every province. So some provinces have a strong province legislative oversight, but others are not so strong. But for the most part, fire services are run by the municipalities that they serve, and the standard setting body is either in the municipality or the province. So it's not as clear cut in Canada. It's very dependent on where you live. So when I've moved to different provinces and different cities throughout my career, you've had to learn new legislation, understand the kind of lay of the land, because it's very different in every province and state, or every province and territory.
Right now, while people are watching this, they're on their Google Maps trying to figure out where these provinces are, right?
Yeah.
All right. So somebody asked me yesterday, I was opening up for a class, and they said, when you made chief, what was it like? And so it made me kind of flash back to the day I got sworn in as fire chief. I was a deputy before, and I had a really good mentor. But there was this moment where I'm in my car after the swearing ceremony, and it sinks the weight of the five bugles that you are in charge. Did you ever have a moment like that when you made chief, you're the top dog, that you kind of reflect back on and think, whew, there was quite a bit of change there?
Yeah, certainly like the reality is I don't think anybody's really ready for the role. Whether it's fire chief or deputy or assistant chief, uh, you might be a high performing captain and get an opportunity to be a platoon chief or a bat chief or a division chief, whatever your department has. And, all of us have been supported throughout the career. It's very few people I've ever met have gone it all alone, never been supported, never had a mentor, and were perfectly prepared for the role they were successful in. So, my personal belief is everybody has help getting to that next level. And the reality is, no matter how much effort you do, you are never really ready to understand what that next role is. So once you're in that role, whether that's at the bat chief or assistant chief or deputy chief or chief level, the first year and a half in that role is a steep learning curve. And I think you are also a product, certainly, of your values that you grew up with, and the values of your organization, but you are also a product of where you came from. So let me kind of help you understand what I mean by that. So when I was in Kitchener, I think I was the youngest promoted captain at the time. There are people who've kind of broken that record now, but I was a young captain, and we did not promote solely by seniority. We had a very merit based promotional process. And as such, as a captain, I remember many times crew members on my crew had many more years of firefighting experience than I did. So, as a young captain, I was, 12 years experience in the fire service, and was a captain and had people on my crew who had been in the fire service for 25, 30 years.
Mm.
So I've seen people promoted in systems and, with my colleagues or departments that I've been in, that also promoted by seniority, which means that captains are typically the most senior people in the crew, right? So it's a different kind of perspective about your relationship between your firefighters and your captains if you are automatically, way more experienced than anybody else on your crew. So my point about that conversation is uh, the way I led, the way I had to lead in that fire service was different than the way I've seen other people lead in departments where seniority is more a factor. And that served me so it's all around relationships is my point, not that I've been here longer than you, right? So when I went to Winnipeg, that served me well because as an assistant chief in a huge metropolitan department, uh, the people that reported to me were 15 to 20
Mm.
years older than I was. So coming in from outside the organization as this young whippersnapper who had not been there and done that in that department meant I had to have a different approach to working with members that I was responsible to work with, and that has been my kind of leadership style, in the fire chief's role as well. So when you move to another department, people don't know who you are, right? They get to learn who you are based on your time with them. It's not like you have 25 years of experience in that fire service and everybody thought, oh, okay, it makes sense that this individual is the fire chief. So that certainly has framed my leadership style, partly because of the department I was originally promoted to an officer in, but also the fact that my career has seen me move around. So to me, leadership is about, inspiring a shared vision, getting people excited about where you're going organizationally, and supporting people in their role. And a lot of the jobs that you do in this role is different than the role you did as a deputy chief. So, as a deputy chief, I was very busy in getting things done. Right, you were a doer, making change
Yeah.
happen in the organization. In this role, I find it's more, and I know we use the term all the time, but it's more strategic, it's more political. It's about supporting your deputies so they can be successful, but making sure in this department we have a three deputy model with three pillars. We happen to have four right now, but our model is based on three deputy chiefs, and we are all trying to work towards the same goal, not pull in opposite directions. So, I think that when somebody becomes a fire chief, yes, at first there's elation, you're excited, there's all of these opportunities, and you want to make, some improvements, and everybody wants to leave the organization better than they found it. But the reality is, what I found in this role, it's about supporting your deputies and providing a common vision, and being able to sell that vision to your council, and whoever is responsible for your fire service delivery in your community.
I like how that role of supporting those deps, because you are right. They are busy if they're doing their job right. They are on top of things. So one of the things maybe you didn't fully dive into, which I'm curious on your view, if you get a new company officer, that new engine company, ladder company boss, and they're looking for advice from you and how, right, they're newly promoted, but I think our company officers are like they're the face of the organization a lot to our public. They're getting pushed down, they're pulled up. They get it from all directions. And I think, so many times we get to see them grow as leaders. So do you have your static advice, your continual advice that you give that new company officer to be successful?
Yeah, certainly. My values and beliefs are the same. You know, I believe you have a fire chief because you have a fire department. It's not the other way around. The fire department is not there to serve the fire chief. The fire chief is there to support the fire service and your firefighters. So your firefighters and your company officers are the pointy end of the spear, as we've talked about in the past, and that's where the mission happens. So in that upside down pyramid strategy, that is where the bulk of your resources are. That is where your focus is, and supporting those members. And for fire service, when you're fighting a fire, that's firefighters. But when you're out doing CRR work and the first two lines of defense with public education and fire prevention and code inspections, that front line is your inspectors and whoever's doing that work, right? So when I say operations, I mean like whatever division that our members are in, that is the primary mission of the organization, and our job is to support them. So first of all, I have an open door policy. Pop in, visit me. So as a chief, I think it's important to press the flesh, to get out and spend time with your frontline troops. For me, that's a huge challenge. We have 51 stations, and spread over, like I said, 5,500 square kilometers. For me to visit our outlying station, it's an ordeal. I have a 2.5 hour drive in one direction to see a station. So, but I certainly, COVID kind of changed everything, but I try to get out to each station over the course of a year. And when I first started here, that was the first thing I committed to. I met every station on every platoon, and that took me 6 months. So I was here prior to my family moving here, or my wife, because we're empty nesters. And for 6 months, I was here. She was still in Ontario. I said, "Yeah, the reality is, for 6 months, I'm going to be doing 16, 18-hour days, getting out and visiting the stations after hours." So I think it is important to kind of have that face time with your team, to let them know that they're important, that that is your priority, to support them, and to help inspire that common vision about where we're going organizationally and get everybody excited about it. So particularly on the company officers, that's one of the focuses that we've had here over the last 4.5 years, and we had it where I came from, but it originally started in the department I was at in Winnipeg, where we lost two captains, unfortunately, in a fire, and critically injured three other firefighters. And we had workplace health and safety orders that required us to do incident command training and fire leadership training for our officers. So we, instead of just providing blue card or some other kind of incident command training, we took a look at it as an opportunity to improve our succession planning and professional development from a firefighter through your various ranks to a chief officer. So for us, that meant we were following fire officer level 1, fire officer level 2, fire officer level 3, fire officer level 4, and eventually into post-secondary education. And the company officer, the captain, to answer your question, is the first step in that journey, getting them the development they need prior to their promotion so that they can be successful. Because nobody's saying that the first day on the job as a captain, you don't have the call that is going to challenge you as any company officer would be challenged. So I think that's an important role in the fire service, to develop our future leaders. And the sooner we can start that, the better off we are. And get them, there should be no mystery, right? If you decide to go to school to take a bachelor degree or a master's degree, it's not like they say, so there's a big mystery. You have no idea what combination of credits it takes in order to get your degree. It's very clear. You need to take these courses for this degree. You can take these electives, and you add all of them up. And if you're successful, you get your degree. We've taken a similar approach here, based on what I've experienced in previous jurisdictions, that we're saying this is what a roadmap looks like to be successful in this organization, whether that's you go through fire prevention, you go through operations, you go through training. Here's the training that's required. Once you're successful, there might be a promotional process in addition to that, but here's the competency requirements in order to be successful. It shouldn't be a mystery, right?
No, and sometimes we keep it a mystery, I think. And right, why do we do that, right? We want our staff to be successful in painting that roadmap. I'm hoping shows dividends. I'm hoping, right, people know what they got to do. And
yeah, so my personal belief is, in previous roles and in seeing other promotional processes with some of my colleagues, there's too much weight sometimes put on the final interview in saying that you can spend 2 hours in an interview and all of a sudden know that this person has all the skills. Well, if you can provide a roadmap and development opportunities that says they've demonstrated they have those skills prior to the interview just becomes a final step in that feeling, making sure somebody's ready for that final step. But the reality is they have already got the competency requirements for it. A lot of times I've seen departments do the interview, promote somebody, and then try to get them training afterwards. So what we're trying to do is push that, earlier in somebody's career so that they're thinking about the next step in their career. Because, and it also depends on kind of how big the organization is and how many levels of ranks there are in the department. And you don't necessarily got to go one step at a time. Some people go 2 steps, some people go 3. But my point is, if somebody stays as a firefighter for 20 years, 25 years, and hasn't really been preparing for that officer role, then the chances of them becoming a captain and a district chief in our organization, it goes captain, district chief, assistant chief, deputy chief. That's a lot of other steps in 10 years if they want to become a chief or a deputy chief in their organization.
Yeah. Hmm. All right, so let's switch gears to the international for a couple minutes, and maybe put your international hat on. I found yesterday, right? So I'm
I got
talking
my international banner over
like
there.
it. That's good. So I was talking to a group of upcoming chief officers, right? They're newly into chief roles. We have a program here in the Detroit area called Fire Staff and Command. It's about executive leadership. And I asked, who knows what the IAFC is? And two people raised their hands. And I then asked, who knows what the IAFF is? And of course, they all, half the room is part of a union. And
Yeah.
so, people knew that, right? So, what's your elevator speech to our new budding leaders on what the IAFC is, or what does it mean to you?
Yeah, certainly a great question, and therein lies our challenge. So maybe before I get directly to your question, I'll explain that the IFC is made up of geographical divisions, and one of those divisions is the Canadian division. So the Canadian division is unique in the IFC in that besides being a geographical division of the IFC, it is it's its own national organization. So they do the role that the IFC does for fire service members in the IFC. So they do government advocacy. They do, try to support the fire service federally that the IFC does for the American Fire Service. And in that role, when I was on the board for the Canadian division, we many times scratched our head at the number of fire chiefs that were part of the organization. So if you take a look at all the fire services across the country,
Mm.
how many fire services have their fire chief or deputy chiefs or assistant chiefs in that organization, and how much more powerful that voice would be when you're advocating to the government about the needs of the fire service if you represented 100% of the fire services. So with the same perspective, the IFC has the same challenge. So the IFC uh, it's a challenge for the IFC to help fire chiefs understand, or up and coming fire chiefs, about the role of the IFC. Who is the IFC? How do we get our message out? How do we beat the drum and let people know about what our mission is and what we can do to help them as fire service leaders or potential fire service leaders uh, develop personally, but also organizationally? So I think there is the Achilles heel for the IFC. How do we get our message out? And certainly that's one of the things that our board is now looking towards making some difference. As you know, we just struck a communications task force that's going to try to figure out how to improve our communications, both internally to our own members, but outwards facing communication as well, whether that's being the voice to CNN during a catastrophic event, or whether that's how to spread the message about the role of the IFC and what they do and what they can do for potential members. So certainly that's a challenge, and we are a federation model, which means that we are made up of other organizations. So those organizations are the geographical divisions I talked about. So the board has an important role in helping bring other organizations together and creating a common vision, a common purpose. So the role of the board is critically important in the next few years as we develop our new strategic plan and figure out how the IFC can start to address some of those gaps.
So, what do you see as the biggest issue as president right now within the IFC?
Well, obviously, we're just coming out of COVID, right? So, like any incident command system, it's important that you have strategic priorities outlined to manage any big events. So if you were to open up an emergency operations center to deal with, a train derailment or something, your IC would set up, what the strategic priorities are to get through this crisis event. So for the IFC, we did something similar. We were at a board meeting when COVID kind of landed in North America, so to speak. And, we didn't maybe articulate this quite as much as we could have, but certainly it's in my next Chiefs Chat magazine article. Our strategic priorities were to, first of all, ensure the IFC remains financially solvent. So, for those who might not be aware, the IFC had made some decisions in the past where we were trying to expand our international footprint. We were hosting conferences abroad, and our financial tools to really understand the cost of some of those investments was maybe not as good as they could have been. My point is, pre-COVID, the organization had lost some money, and then, as many people are aware, COVID has not only been a public health crisis, it's also been a financial crisis for the economy. So when the economy has shut down, that, challenged fire services to have budgets. We were paying more money for PPE. We might have had hiring freezes organizationally. People may have been laid off in their organization. So for the IFC, not only did we have to deal with the public health crisis of COVID, we also had to be realistic and say, we're going to have huge financial pressures because the IFC runs conferences for networking and professional development, which are huge revenue streams for the organization. So one of our priorities was to remain financially solvent. Another strategic priority was to save firefighters' lives, protect IFC employees, and prevent transmission of the virus, and to educate our membership on this new virus and advocate for the fire service needs to government. So those were our kind of big three strategic priorities. So where do I feel our priorities are as an organization? Well, coming out of COVID, kind of making sure we can learn to live with COVID. Certainly, we mentioned it earlier. The board has a commitment to strategic planning. So we had, lost almost, our organization lost about half of its horsepower as a result of having to make some of these difficult financial decisions. So before we start to rebuild the organization and add capacity to the organization, what the board wants to do is develop a robust strategic plan to say, this is where we're going organizationally. So let's build an organization that will help us achieve those goals, not just reestablish all the old positions we had in the past that don't necessarily align with the strategic plan. So I think critically, the strategic plan needs to get completed, but not quick, right? Not, we don't want it so quick that it's not a good plan. So we need the voice of our stakeholders. We need to get them engaged, make sure that we become an organization that supports the fire service and fire service leaders of the future, not fire service needs of the past, because I think the fire service is changing. And certainly one of the other things that the board has demonstrated commitment to, and certainly I have been outspoken about wanting to be an ally, is on the equity, diversity, and inclusion front. The fire service culture, historically has been a male-dominated workplace, and we need to make sure that the fire service of the future is an inclusive work environment, one where people can see themselves being a part of. Just take the volunteers, for example. The volunteer fire service makes up the majority of the fire service in Canada and the US, and everybody's having the same problem with attraction and retention. So that could be one of our answers for the future, that people who did not necessarily see themselves as firefighters 20 years ago might see themselves as firefighters for the future. But, even in the career sector, we need to be representative of our community so our community can see a fire service that meets their needs and understands them as a client. So I think that is an important message that the fire service needs to get out, and we need to develop leaders with the tools to be able to run inclusive organizations that are maybe different than fire services of the past.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think as fire chiefs, how the topics get to us are drastically different. If you want to put them in the DEI category, it's not just about females. It's not just about skin color anymore. There is a big learning curve for a lot of our fire chiefs to dive in. I believe about 3 weeks ago, the IFC released a guide, a great guidebook. I know we ordered some extra copies, so I know members can get them, and you hopefully start driving more discussions with a big group locally. I mean, here's a great resource from the IFC. I know I've gotten lots of feedback. You gotten some feedback on the book? Because a lot of people are.
I got it sitting on my table right behind me, and I'm also excited to say that we're starting some conversations with the Metro Chiefs board to work on trying to improve our programming and understanding and have an evidence-based approach to EDI. The last couple things I would say that are priorities for us organizationally is not only the strategic plan and figuring out where the fire service needs to go for the future to remain relevant, but certainly the effects of climate change are changing the types of calls that we go to and the community's risk when it pertains to wildland urban interface, more extreme weather events, whether that's snowstorms or hurricanes, torrential downpours that are causing landslides. All of those types of situations are happening more frequently. And the capacity of the fire service to be that all hazards approach, when you're having, the 1 in 1,000 year storm every, 10 years, there's effects to that on the community. So, helping the fire service be prepared for that, making sure that we advocate for the fire service needs to FEMA and the U.S. Fire Administration or whoever the body is that is appropriate to have that conversations with, and help fire services have the resources they need, whether that's through grant programs or education, or starting to mobilize the fire service to be more than focusing on just structural firefighting, because I know that's a huge risk we have here that literally keeps me up at night, dealing with wildland urban interface and hurricanes that seem to slam into us on a regular basis now.
Yeah, the volatility, the size gets bigger. It draws. I mean, you're spot on. I think that so many of us are trying to drive action too, right? You couldn't watch do Canadians watch the Super Bowl like we do?
We do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
We also have the CFL championship, but certainly many of us are fans of the Super Bowl. I know I was watching it.
Yeah, so you couldn't watch the Super Bowl and not see how the paradigm is changing in our vehicle selection. I made this statement the other day that our fire staff vehicles are probably going to be electric in the next 5 years. You're not going to be able to buy the fire SUV you had, and you think of all the discussions and change management we have to have, right? How do our wiring systems work? How do they work in the cold? I don't think we want the chief stopping for an hour as he tries to drive to the station that's on the edge of your jurisdiction, but you're going to have to stop and charge. And how do we work through this, and how do we charge in stations? But that's one small piece of climate change, because there's an issue affecting our fire service, whether we want to see it or not, right? You look at these wildland fires, like you were saying, and it's stressing the demands on our organization. And I love this Metro conference. If there's Metro chiefs that have made it this far in, I hope they take all their staff that they can to this Metro conference. I think, Chief, you and I were on the call, and they were outlining the agenda. That I love FRI. This Metro Chiefs Conference is incredible coming up.
Yep. Yeah, certainly they are a great section to educate their members, and I know their members are all in. So, again, lessons learned from the IFC. How can we get that kind of passion for our members to stay engaged? So, what I mean by stay engaged is it's common in the metro section that well beyond retirement, people stay engaged in the metro section. They're called senior members. So, I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other by breaking down our silos between divisions and sections. And, when I was at the VCOS conference recently and spoke at the VCOS conference, we had a after action get together. So the VCOS board got together, talked about how the conference went, where there's some opportunities for improvement, and they were talking about and it was a great conference, by the way. So certainly not that there was a lot of work that needed to be done, but I was inspired by their desire to constantly kind of raise the bar. And they were talking about their next conference, and they were trying to figure out, what kind of speaker to bring in, who's a great speaker that will really get our people fired up. And one of the things that I chatted with them about is I said, well, have you ever thought about reaching out to, another section or a division and asking them who they've brought in the past? Because there's nothing necessarily wrong with bringing in something from the fire life safety section, like my quick observations are, if I would go to a fire life safety event or health and safety, it's all health and safety stuff. It makes sense, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a health and life safety topic and infuse it into a VCOS conference or to a division conference. So, sometimes that happens on its own, but there's no reason why we can't reach across lines and pillars and responsibilities in the IFC and be better together. Because I do believe we have a lot of content experts, and by sharing experiences, I think we can build a better organization for the future. And that's partly what our strategic plan is about, and that professional development that I talked about. FRI has been a great conference for our officer development, but the challenge that I've had as a fire chief is sending many future officers or development opportunities for my company officers to a conference that's halfway across North America.
Yeah.
If there were a regional strategy where we could do the same company officer development program that we do at FRI, and I don't mean take it out of FRI, but in addition to having it at FRI, have it, you could have a track at one of the sections conferences for the officer development program, or you could have it in the New England division, or you could have it in the Western division. And then geographically, it's you can pick the place that's closest to you to send your people for that development opportunity.
I think if you get Coles 1 in Halifax, my staff's going to ask me. I mean, one of them is going to figure it out. So you got to send me up there.
Yeah, I didn't use the acronym because I thought some of the viewers might not know what I was talking about with Coles, but that's exactly what I was talking about. Having a Coles program that is close to people to be able to attend, right? It really would reduce the cost of that for the department, which ultimately means they can send more people, right?
The IFC is this huge machine, and there's no doubt when you get out and talk to people, I look at it a lot like our fire service, right? We have this president that's supposed to have this very big global view and coordinate and push and help us brand, and much of what you said you do as fire chief, you're doing as president. And I think you're spot on in a sense of there's an expectation that within the IFC, sections, divisions, committees are all working together and supporting. And it's so easy to be in that silo. In right New England chapter, Western Division doing great things, and to reach across. Think about your fire department, right? C shift is doing great things and training is doing great things. And what's that role of the chief in bringing them together to do meet that collective goal? And I think that's where I'm excited, Chief, is you brought up the strategic plan and the work that's going to be done, I think, here in the next couple months within the IFC. So as you're getting closer to the end of being president than the beginning. You got us through, you got us through COVID. There were a lot of great things that the IFC continued to provide resources for its members. You got 6 months left. What are you hoping to see done within the IFC over this next 6 months?
Yeah, so great question, and I've had this conversation with a couple of past presidents, including one that's on our board now as a past president. And as their term came up, I remember them kind of saying, "Well, they're looking forward to the finish line," uh, because it's a one-year term, as you know, normally, and there's been talk about whether that term should be extended and to provide more kind of stability in an organization staying on course. So I think one of the challenges we have in our one-year term is without a solid strategic plan, it could be an organization that flip-flops from year to year. So I think the strategic plan is important to keep us focused and on track. But the challenge with an extended term is, in order to meet the requirements of the office, you need to be a fire chief on the day you're sworn in. Um, some people, not anybody recently, but in the past, some people used to be sworn in and then retire so they could focus on their presidency. But I think the the organization would not be suited well. It's not a dictatorship, right? I think it's important that people understand that the role of the president is to, run the board meetings, to chair the board meetings, and work in a structure in a large organization that empowers its members to move the organization ahead. So I think that should be our focus in the strategic plan, how we, as a member driven organization, empower our members to move the organization forward. To believe that you're going to have one person at the head of the organization who's going to have the silver bullet and fix all the problems, I think is unrealistic. And the reality is, if that were the strategy, you would be in a position to flip flop back and forth. So while many chiefs that I've talked to who were the president in the past said they were kind of glad when their term was coming up, because it is a busy role, and a lot of people don't see that busyness behind the scenes. Uh, I acted for 6 months before my term started, as you know. So yes, I have 6 months left, but I've been in it for a year. So that 6 months from now is looking good. And I know that the people who will move into that role after me are certainly tremendous leaders. But I think the most important thing is to structure the organization in a way that utilizes the expertise of the people inside the organization. So priorities for the next 6 months, drive through the strategic planning process, engage our members, improve our communication so that we can talk about the merits of being a member of the IFC, help the government understand who the IFC is, and we're getting better at that. Certainly, Ken LaSalle's team is a great asset that we have to do our government advocacy. We have a good relationship with the new fire administrator, not that we didn't have with the previous one, but certainly Dr. Lori Moore Merrill is a trailblazer in her own right. But she's also, got a passion for the fire service that's different than fire administrators of the past, and she's an evidence-based person, obviously, as a doctor, and we are very fortunate to have a good relationship with her, and working with our sections and divisions to be moving forward. So and anybody, in your role as fire chief, I imagine you want to leave the fire service better than you found it. And if we all stand on the shoulders of those who come before us, we will get better. But, you know, if you were to go to a fire and you're dealing with a big fire over here, and, you know, you have a smaller problem, not small problem, but a smaller problem over here, your priority might be the fire and then dealing with this issue. So certainly the priorities of the organization for the last year have been COVID, all those strategic priorities that I covered. And while I am quite proud to stand shoulder to shoulder to the other board members, our other section and division leaders and members throughout the IFC who have kept moving and doing the work of the IFC, and all as well our staff, I'm quite proud of everything we've done over the last 2 years to deal with the financial crisis, to deal with the change in legislation, to deal with keeping our members safe and advocating for us during COVID, make sure PPE is available the best we could, help understand the counterfeit issues, deal with the Z access issues, deal with next generation 911, start to move the wildland urban interface strategies forward, the yellow ribbon report. Like, the work that's gone on has been tremendous, despite the fact that the people who are doing the work, we've lost some of that capacity in the organization with IFC staff. Our members have been managing a pandemic in their own departments, still doing the work of the IFC. Proud of all of that. But could you imagine if all the effort that we spent on COVID over the last 2 years was focused on the fire service and moving forward? So, you know, while I'm proud of all those efforts, I'm also inspired by the fact that together we're better. And with a solid plan, I think, you know, the future of the fire service and the IFC is bright.
Chief, I'm going to end it on that because I think you perfectly summed it up in so many regards to not only what the IFC is doing, but the work you've been doing. You have led with integrity, hard work, high ethical standards. And I hope that Halifax and your firefighters are proud to call you their fire chief because every time I've ever interacted with you, you've shown strong leadership and based on your core values, and you don't waver. And so I want to thank you for your time in being with us. I want to thank you for everything you've done for the fire service and the IFC. And we're hoping everybody has a great day. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you today, Chief. Have a great day. Bye-bye.